Hello, YouTubers. This is a new session where we get to talk a little bit about transcending, problem details from an HTTP API error detail or an exception to back into your application. This is a little bit of an advanced topic when it comes to building integrations between APIs and front ends, portals, but I'm going to try to simplify it today and make sure that, kind of grasp the idea of it. So let's just start here real quick and talk a little bit about, what happens when you are building an API integration with, a portal integration with an API. So let's just assume here, I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Let's just assume here you have this really nice, UI. So that's let's say this is your portal, right? And your UI is talking to a sort of an API. Okay, so your API is here and your API is doing some really specific business logic, right? So let's say, for instance, you're trying to submit a student to be registered in a particular database or a particular system. There's validations, business rules that are on your API level that basically say the student birth date has to be, 12 years, or less. There's particular restrictions based on the student history. All of this logic, all of this knowledge is sitting behind in an API. And when the portal tries to submit an object back to this API, the API may, respond with an error. It might respond and say you have a bunch of issues that are happening in your request that is not going to let us and allow us to proceed with processing your request. This logic lives right here. So you have logic living here in your API, and you're basically trying to transcend these errors up all the way up to your UI. Now bear with me here because this is really important. The standardized way of communicating errors is that our API will throw an exception with a bunch of error details like we talked about before, and then your controller is going to turn those into problem details. Let's take a look at what that looks like in the real world. I'm going to spin up TS007, which is a social media, open source social media platform I've been working on with a bunch of people. If you're following my videos, I'm going to show you here what that looks like. TS007, here it is. Let's open this up and let's just talk about, what that looks like in the real world. So it's just a simple API, that basically allows you, if you're in a social media, you're going to be able to post some, some posts on social media. So there's this post model. And this post model, if I go all the way up to the controller level here, I hope we have a post. I think we did. In the post controller level here, if you go, you'll see something called post async, right? This is just a coincidence of naming conventions, but you have the post going on here, and you're basically handling that there is a post and the post validation. There's an issue with the validation for this post, and something has occurred. Okay. Now, when there is an issue with this post, we get back a problem detail. So if you go a little bit deeper into the service that's handling this and go on validate post on add, you'll see a bunch of rules. The ID has to be good, the content has to be good, the author has to be good, and all that kind of stuff. That means if I go like this and run my API like this, here we go. So here's my API, and if I go and try to submit, a post that's invalid, like I'm gonna do right now. Here's that beautiful Swagger piece. Thanks Brian Parker for fixing our restful sense Swagger generation here. And then it's giving you this body with some data. I'm gonna make sure that all of this data is invalid, really. So I need an empty GUID. Here's an empty GUID, a whole website for an empty GUID. That's great. I love it. So let's take this here. And let's go down here and let's put these empty GUIDs right here. So this is this guy and this guy and this guy. I'm just going to put all the kind of bad data in there. And then we don't need the comments. Here we go. Okay. So now if I try to execute this guy, what am I going to get back? I'm going to get back a validation issue, like a problem detail. So I'm going to run this real quick. Sorry about there it is. So what are we getting back? Look at this. You're getting the generic high-level error, invalid post, please correct the errors and try again. But it's also telling you this ID is required, the content is required, and the author is required. We could also play around with the dates as well. We can go and say, just give me a no date, really, like year 1 or something like that. And it's basically going to do the same thing. I'm not going to provide them at all like this. Let's see. If I take these dates at all, it will also tell you some more details about the date. So now our problem detail is going to get a little bit bigger. See, the date is required and it's not recent, and the date is required and all that. So that's a problem detail, right? That's what we call a problem detail. An exception has happened, it got generated, and it collected all of these issues, and it sent it right back to you in a nice standardized way, a dictionary with key values, where the values are a list of issues, just like you see in the created date here, where it gives you. We already talked about that part, and I already put a video out there, and I'm going to reference it in the description of this video. Now here comes the second part. What happens after that, right? I want the client that consumes that data to be able to carry that data forward in their communications. Okay, so if I'm handling that exception, I want to be able to transcend this back from a problem detail into being a dictionary, a data dictionary, which is something I've done a part of, on the restful sense part, but there's the transcendence piece that's missing. So let's just go up in here and let me explain the problem. So Ricky and I the other day, we were building the remove by ID, so we're basically going and saying I want to remove this entity by ID, and I want to go and say I want to handle any exceptions that may occur if the post ID is invalid, right? So if that post ID is coming in as an empty GUID, an exception will happen on the API, and it's going to come back to me and say this exception is not going to happen, right? So if I go, let me give you an example here. So let me zoom out here a little bit. Let me find the delete. So here's a delete. The idea here is that if I try this out and go here and say here's an empty GUID, this guy is going to give me back a problem detail. A problem detail. Let's see. There it is. ID is required. Do you see this part? It's right here. So this guy is coming back and saying, here's a bunch of errors, invalid post, please correct the errors and try again. Here's your 400, bad request, and ID is required. I want that to be carried forward inside my business logic on the UI side without my core business logic knowing that these errors, whether they're coming from a foundation service or coming from an external API. That's the magic of it. What that basically means is that, between the API and the UI, if you're building a broker in here and you're building a foundation service, and this foundation service is working like this and going and saying, okay, this is my API broker, and my API broker is going to go and call the API, and then restful sense will take care of the communication for you, and then you have a foundation service in here. This foundation service responsibility is to be able to go and say, if I take this guy out like this and I put these guys right here, because that's basically what's inside the portal, I want to be able to go and say, the exceptions that happened here, like if you have a view service that's sitting right here, because you're in a UI model, if I have view service in here, this view service will have absolutely no idea and can't tell the difference whether the issue has happened right here at the API level or it actually originated from here. So we want to streamline the errors that are coming from an external resource and map it right back into your system. So at any point in time, if you decide to completely destroy the API and build a completely new way of integration, maybe you'll talk to the database directly, this core business logic aspect of your service or your portal will not be impacted in any way, shape, or form. Again, this is a little bit of an advanced topic, so bear with me. So you have the problem detail coming in from the API, it gets turned into an exception, and then we want that exception to become localized, right? I introduced a while back the idea of localization categorization. If you have a service exception, localize that into a failed service exception, and then you categorize as a service categorization exception. I want to be able to transcend that data right here, and it becomes just a normal dictionary that is being carried forward in your validation aspect. How are we going to do that? This is also amongst the things that I'm working on here, an introduction, to some capabilities that I just added to our system, to our library exceptions. So let's just start like this. I'm going to go here in the exceptions area, and I'm going to add a new. I already actually have this guy. I have invalid post exception. Okay, so this is an invalid post exception. I'm going to go here and do an overload, but I need first to upgrade the exceptions library. So let me go up here real quick and upgrade my exception library. Let's go up in here and let's upgrade. Let's see, exceptions. I wonder if it didn't pick it up yet. Let me update restfulsense first, and then I will upgrade exceptions. Let's see here. So it should be version 1.7 for exceptions. Here we go. Or maybe it's not. No, it should be installed. So I see exceptions in here. It should be installed here. So this is my dependencies, my packages. Where did this come from? Let's see. Okay, this is version 1.6. Let's go ahead and upgrade this guy. Let's find exceptions in here. That's odd. Exceptions. Here we go. That's odd. It seems like it's not able to find it. This is the first time this happens. Let's see. So there's installed, and then there is search, and then I'm looking for exceptions. Huh. Okay, we're gonna have to do it old school way. You know, when you get stuck, this is where engineering is. You gotta be able to go and say, I want to upgrade my library. Is it exception? Oh, I called it exception, not exceptions. That's embarrassing. You know, I created the library and I can't remember its own name. That's really sad. Okay, so let me install this real quick. So here's this guy installed, done and donezo. And then now I can overload this guy. I can go here and say public invalid post exception, which will take an inner exception, just like this, and it will also take data, which is iDictionary, basically. This way, I'm transcending my data from the API communication all the way down to this one. So let's just do this. And I'm going to do base. Here we go. And then I'm going to go and say invalid post error occurred. Please correct the errors and try again. Here we go. And I'm going to stop this with a, here we go. And then I'm going to add a few things now. Now I can go here and say, in addition to the message, I can add an inner exception and I can also add data. So this is a new thing in this exceptions library 1.7 where you can actually do this magic here. You can basically transcend the errors, pass the data down, and own it as a localized exception. So now your localized exception, you know, can now take that data and work with it. Right? If you don't want to download the new version, all you really have to do is just go up in here and say, out of that inner exception, add data, and take your inner exception.data, and it will just work just fine. This is just a simplification because I don't want you to have any logic or any, you know, function call in your exceptions. Your exceptions are meant to be, you know, just a model that represents an error. It's not meant to be a place where you go add in functionality and mapping and do all that craziness. This is why I'm building a library like this. Okay. So this is our guy here. Let's just go ahead and write a test. I want to go and say, you know, assume that I have a crazy test that, you know, crazy exception that happened. So I'm going to go up in here and say, okay, here's fact. Public async task should throw dependency validation exception on remove if bad request occurs and log it async. So here's a bad request or a let's say if a validation error occurs. If a validation error occurs and log it async. Right? Okay, let's do that. Given when then. And here is my var http response bad request exception. So that's my guy. So new http response bad request exception. There it is, right? And this guy needs a response message and a problem detail. No problem. Let's go up in here and say, you know, here is, you know, random message. Get random message. Here we go. And then this is response message. So that's my random message from here. So this piece is done. And then it wants an HTTP response. So this is HTTP response equal new HTTP response. Response like this. Is that what it wants? It wants HTTP response message. Okay, response message. I always forget that one. And then it wants the response message to be passed in. Perfect. So that's this guy, HTTP response message, just like that. And this guy, let's see, or rather, no, the message being passed in. Okay, got it, perfect. Okay, so that's our response message right here. Great. Now let's go up in here and fulfill this requirement here. So this guy wants to go and say, I need, as a constructor, it needs the response HTTP response message, and it also needs the response message itself. Right? So it takes two parameters. It takes a response message, which is HTTP, and also a random response message. Okay. Now I'm going to add something more to this. Here's where it gets a little interesting. I want to generate a random dictionary of key value pairs, right? And I want to be able to add that to this. Luckily, this HTTP response bad request exception in and of itself also has, it's inheriting from exceptions, right? Internally, it's actually, if you go into the definition of this guy here, and if you go into the HTTP response exception, this guy already is also a child of exception. So naturally, I can go up in here and say the problem details on this one is also just data that's coming in, right? So I can go up in here and say this HTTP response message, response bad request exception, dot add data. Look, there you go. And I can add in there whatever data I want without any issues. Right? Let's generate a bunch of this data. Let's just go here and say, I want to generate a bunch of this data. I'm going to go steal that from the library itself. So exception library itself has this stuff in it. I can go here and say, give me a random dictionary. Here it is. I'm going to steal that guy here, and I'm going to go here and say, give me a random dictionary. So here we go. Dictionary, list, key value pair. Great. Here it is. Okay, let's go back here and say, here we go, a I dictionary. I don't know if it'll help me with this one, but we'll see. Random dictionary. Create random dictionary. Here's my guy. Is it going to be happy? Looks like it. Okay, I dictionary, exception, data. So that's from random dictionary. And also the last thing, which is what this transcendence is all about. This is very brand new, so bear with me. In here is the expected exception data. So I'm testing the transcendence that's happening in here from the outer exception into the inner, from the external exception into the localized exception. Okay, so that means I can go here and say this is my exception data. And this guy is going to be very happy because that's what the problem details are coming from the outside world are going to look like. Okay, cool. So we have this guy. Now, what else is left? We need to fake an injury, right? Like go here and say, set up broker dot delete post by ID. It is any good. We don't care. And then this guy will throws async, right? Delete post by ID. Yeah, the magical autopilot copy pasta machine is complaining. And then this guy is throwing HTTP response bad request exception. Okay, so here's a bad request exception coming in with problem details already incorporated in it. Someone might ask me, say, Hassan, how do you know the problem details turned into data in that exception? I tell you, that's what restfulsense is already doing. Like if you go back to the open source the last update, and that one took a little bit of time. The last update on restfulsense, that was exactly what I was doing. I basically went and said, take any problem detail coming from the API and turn that into a data. So I'm dealing with just a normal exception that's coming from the outside world. If you want to see what that looks like real quick, if you go into, I think, validation services, yeah, you'll see this stuff in here. You'll see throw new HTTP response inefficient storage exception, and it takes in inefficient details. So this maps to problem details, and if you go into the problem details, it basically takes your problem details, deserializes it, turns it back into a normal problem detail, from the HTTP request. There's a lot of work going into this one. One of my biggest projects out there is to actually go out there and get a problem detail from any API. It can be Node, it can be, I don't know, Flask, Python, whatever is out there, and it will turn it back into the problem. So that's already taken care of. Okay, the rest is just good and dandy. It's very easy. We just want to go and ensure So this is your HTTP response bad request exception, and this guy has data. What that basically means, I want to go here and say var invalid post exception, right? And I'm going to go here and say new invalid post exception. That's the expectation, right? And now this invalid post exception has an overload. We will take the HTTP response bad request exception, and it will take the exception data. And I'm not going to say take it like this is you're building the expected. It's supposed to be doing something other than what your business logic is doing. So I'm taking this exception, I'm taking the exception data right here. Okay, the rest is easy. I can go here and say expected post dependency validation exception. I don't know if this guy is already in place, but we can build one post dependency. Oh, thank God. This way I got that anywhere in here. So there you go. So here you go. So we got this guy here. So we have the dependency validation. This invalid post will transcend the data. It will take the data over, and now you didn't just localize. You actually truly localized by transcending also the data. So now the problem details and the data issues are already going through with you, as you go, knowing that now you actually have data in place, so you can validate this piece. And then we'll make it fail in a second. I'll show you how is that going to fail in a second. Okay, so there's that part. Let's just go ahead and say value task. The rest is easy, very, very simple. We're already building on top of patterns, above patterns, above patterns for 20 years of engineering experience that'll take you to the next level as you go. So, okay, so this is remove post by ID task, like this. So await this dot service dot remove post by ID, and I need some dummy ID that I don't care about. So I'm just gonna go here and say some post ID, because it doesn't really, in this case here, like we said before, it doesn't really matter at this point in time what is the ID that is being passed in, because I'm throwing the exception anyway. I'm basically going and saying whatever that ID that is being passed in, even if you didn't pass anything at all, it doesn't matter. Because I want to see how my service is going to behave. The purpose of this particular test is I want to see how my service will behave when an issue like this occurs. Okay, let's move forward. So now the next step here is to go and say, well, await, assert, throws async, right? This is this guy, and this is post dependency validation exception. That's what I expect to come out of this. And then remove post by ID task as task. This is already taken care of. And then I can go here and say this dot the mock first has been called. So verify that we try to honor the chronological order here of things. So I'm gonna go here and say post delete post by ID. Not even some post ID. It's just it is any GUID. It is any GUID at this point in time, and this guy is times once. Okay, that's one. Now let's take out the logging broker. This is where it gets interesting. So now your broker is gonna go and validate that your inner exception data is also, because we have this same exception as, right? So I can go here and say log error. It is, right, same exception as expected dependency validation exception. Now someone might say, but you're validating the categorical exception, not the localized exception. No, not really. I'll show you right now in a second. If you go inside same exception as, you'll see that we're validating two things actually. So we're validating the messages, but we're also going and saying the inner exception data has to equal the inner exception of the expectation. So you're basically making sure that this problem details data transcendent from the API is already going through in here. So what do I need here? So I'm breaking this guy like this. Now the last thing I can do here is that go and say, okay, let's validate things are being called properly. So that's this guy here. Now this test, that's a proper test right there. You're basically going and saying, here's my problem details, and I don't think we need expected, I guess. It's just exception data. That's fine. So random message, ship response message, great. The rest is just basically details. In fact, actually, I don't think the message here is even important. I'm just gonna go here and say some message, because it's just a filler in just to get through the system like this. Right? The same thing in here, some response message. There you go. Simplifying things a little bit, making things pretty. So here's my exception. Here's the data that's coming through the exception, and this is really what I care about. Great. Let's run this test. If I run this test here, And we have a build issue. What is the problem? Oh, this guy has exceptions as well, but I didn't upgrade it. And also the same thing happens, I think, with restfulsense. So let's upgrade both of them. Here we go. B unit 2. Eagle already pushed some amazing stuff. That's great. Here we go. Okay, and back to the error. That's still not fluent assertions. Oh yeah, okay, cool. All right, because exceptions library already have been upgraded to fluent assertions. So this guy, whatever it goes, it's gonna kind of force people to upgrade, which is great. That's a good thing. Okay, let's run our test again. Let's go back here and let's run our test again. Let's do this. Here we go. We don't want it just to fail. I want it to fail with the right reasons. So in here, it's going to go and say, yeah, I expected you to throw the type of post-dependency validation exception, but I got this HTTP request, bad request exception. Wonderful. So far, so good. This is going flawlessly. Okay, fail. This guy is failing. We're submitting this. Good. Now let's go handle that exception. That's the easy part. Let's go down here and go to implementation. Let's go to try catch. Let's go all the way down to HTTP catch, HTTP response, bad request exception. And I'm gonna go this guy, I'm gonna go and say invalid post exception. Now it looks like it's just coming from this inner service, invalid post exception. And now this guy is gonna take HTTP response exception and HTTP response exception dot data. This is what's different about this piece. That's called transcendence. We're transcending error details into data, mapping it, and making it ready for your production work. Okay? The last thing here is just to go and say create and log dependency validation exception, because the validation, and now the categorization is going to really tell you, right, where this problem is happening. So the localized exception is not going to tell you that. It's going to say this, it's invalid based on some validations, but the categorization is going to tell you, oh wait, this is a dependency validation exception. This is very useful for us as an engineer, because this is, as engineers, because we're logging these exceptions, but to the end user, they really don't care. It's still an invalid. An invalid post is an invalid, whether the validation issue is happening on your local API or on your client, whatever that's happening, that's the problem. Okay, let's go back to the test here. Here's my test. Here we go. And I'm going to run my test real quick. And pass. Okay, that's the beauty of this. Let's verify that this is actually passing for the right reasons. Let's say I didn't use the overload and I just said, hey, take in just the exception and move on. You know, or not even either one of those. Just take the exception here and move on. If I go and run this again, you're going to run into issues. It says, no, wait a second, the data is not being honored here. So this way, this is a very critical and crucial issue to continue our forever evolving engineering standard. This is really, really important, because that's how you're transcending and going back into the stream. So your core business logic on your API or your UI, they have absolutely no idea where this problem detail is coming from. Okay, so this guy is passing, but don't take my word for it. Let's try it out. Okay, I'm gonna stand up that API, and I'm gonna try to send a bad request downstream, and let's see how that one is gonna pan out. I don't know if we have views that we can attach to this, but we could probably use just a page just for funsies and see how that one works out. Let's go and just mark this test as pass first. You should throw validation exception if validation error occurs. Here we go. So this one is pass, right? That's good. Okay. Okay, so I have this guy. Now let's just attach this service just for funsies. I'm going to attach this service to anything so I can run my application and see what happens. So there's a nice page down here. Let me hide the camera here so you can see what I'm doing. There's a nice page down here in the, here it is. This is the index page, right? Just for fun, I'm just going to go here and do code. Don't do this at home. Don't use code in your production work. That's a bad idea. You know, stay unobtrusive, please. That's how you're going to help people, other engineers, be able to work with your code. But just for funsies, I'm just going to go here and say inject. And I'm going to inject in here a little property that's post service. That's the service that we're trying to build here. This is post service. And I'm just going to say post service. So I'm injecting, this is a dependency injection kind of thing. And I'm adding in, oh, I love that we can now do this in here. Back in just 2 years ago, we couldn't actually do any of that. Okay, and then that's initialized. So override on initialized async. I'm just gonna do this GUID empty bad very bad ID, and I'm gonna say here GUID.empty. So that's an empty GUID, and then I'm gonna go here and say await this dot. Did you guys see how it just added the async for me automatically? That's pretty cool. Look, await this dot. So, oh, not anymore. Post service exception, and then remove post by ID async. No autocomplete. Sad. And this is empty bad very bad ID. So that's what I'm passing in. And then I'm going to do async in here. It's still struggling. This is the finalized version of Visual Studio, by the way. It's still a little bit struggling, but hopefully it'll get there. It'll get there. Okay. So when I launch my API, my data, I should receive that exception. So I'm going to go here and say try and catch, so I can get that exception from the API, all the way up from the API. The validations will happen, and I'm going to disable the one that I'm doing locally because this is just a structural validation, but it's the only one available right now to show you. But with much larger validation, things get a lot more interesting, especially when it's business logic related. Okay, I'm going to put a breakpoint here, and then I'm going to go to my service here real quick, and I'm just going to disable this guy for now because I want the problem to come from that API that's running. So the same problem that you saw in the let's see, where's this in the Postman. Let me show you if I can. We're still running, but I don't know where we are. Let me just start it again. Here we are. Yeah, so remember the problem with, you're passing in an empty ID in here. Too many things I copied. Okay, there it is. If I execute like this guy will freak out. It'll say, hey, you have a validation problem, right? I want to show that all the way up to the UI, and the UI is none the wiser where that problem is coming from in terms of where it's generated from. Of course, we know where it's coming from. We just want to control where it's generated from. Okay, let's do this. So I'm going to run my UI now with all the nice breakpoints that I have in place. Let's go here in Tarafu portal, and I'm going to run this guy. I hope we registered the services. I don't know if we did. Here we go. Yeah, I didn't register the service. See, something told me that we forgot something. Because Ricky and I are still working on this feature, we didn't get to the part where we register the service yet before we create a PR. So I think we'll be just fine. So I'm going to go here and just register services, add scoped post service. And this is post service right here. Here we go. Okay, let's do this again. I'm not sure what this error trusted root certificate is. What else is this guy complaining about? Logging broker. Okay, let's fix this. What's going on? Let's see. Add logging. This is the API broker, logging broker. Does this guy need to go first or something? Let's see. Let me just rebuild everything here and see. Make sure that. What about this logging broker that's freaking it out? Logging broker. iLogger. Yeah, that's very straightforward. Let's try this again. Some services are not able to be constructed. Error while validating the service descriptor. Server's type. Logging broker. It's scoped versus transient kind of thing. Let's see. Is there anything here that I'm adding as non-scoped? I'll add this as transient. Just for now. I'll add this as transient. Add transient. Here it is. Okay, perfect. Let's try this again. Tarafu, iLogging broker, transient implementation type. Let's see, what is this guy dependent on anyway? Activate logger while unable to resolve type iLogger while attempting to normally doing the sorry, this is a diversion. Let me do this real quick. Let's because we're just testing this, I don't want to waste our time with this. I'm gonna just disable this guy for now. Just for now, just for a second. Because I really just want to show you the exception, and then we can fix this in another day. Let's see here if that will let me. I think it might still kind of freak out because my exceptions here. Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's do this real quick. Here we go. And loggings, transient. I think I also need to kind of hide the registration piece because it's trying to instantiate it for some reason. And I'm suspecting that this is something new that's going on, but let's just see. Okay. Okay, perfect. This now we're getting some actual action. So okay, so I need to kind of update my settings in here. So this guy API configuration, it wants the API from here. Let me go to the API here real quick. So it just wants the URL. So this is the URL of my API. Here's the URL of my API. And then let's try to run again. So this is it trying to communicate with that API to get to the next point. Here we go. Here we go. Here's the exception. Now, this exception should be a dependency validation exception, which is true. This guy is coming in, and I'm sorry if you're on your phone. I can actually increase the font here. This one is a little bit harder. So you're gonna have to kind of zoom in or something. But what's basically is this is a dependency validation exception, right? The data in there doesn't have much because this is the actual categorical exception. But look at the inner exception of this guy. The inner exception has data, and the data has information. It has the ID and it has the value, which is ID is required. Just as if this is transcendence. This is literally me taking the exception that happened all the way down on the API, and I'm transcending it all the way up to your UI. So if you have an entire list of issues that are happening, right? Let's say you're collecting issues from multiple places. You can transcend all of these in one bucket very easily, and then add on top of it. This is really, really important so people can understand, now when you're working with an API and you have an issue happening with your API. So this is the high level map now. Like this is our view service at this level in here, and you are communicating with an API, but your API itself has its own kind of communication in here. So it has its own, kind of protocol, and you have a foundation service in here. And you have a broker, maybe a storage broker in here. Storage broker, like this, right? So your API is making this communication, even though the issue has happened here, like the validator happened on this particular foundation service in here, it's being transcendent all the way up here as if it is a localized exception. Okay, this is how this is going to work. This is the idea of this. I hope you found this a little bit useful. As soon as Ricky and I are done with this particular feature, you should be able to see that code. It's already in a branch. I'll give you the branch name so you can take a look at it. Let me revert back the index stuff, and let me revert back the commenting of things. So this is me reverting the commenting of the. I need to see what's up with the API broker, but that's a different story. That's a story for another day. Let me revert this one as well. And I don't mind leaving this in the configuration here. I think that's okay as long as it's not really super secret stuff. Here we go. And then this is the last one. Okay, so this is basically what this is. You're basically transcending data And this was a missing piece in our standard. We basically want to be able to, if I want that, the next step to this is to be able to go and say every single item in this dictionary, if you have like a form that has first name, middle name, last name, and all that kind of good stuff, I want to kind of map these problem details, which is a dictionary that's coming, a data dictionary that's coming in from the API, to be placed on top of every form entry, right? What that basically means, and I'm gonna try to show you this in the next Blazor series, is that if you have a simple form like this and you have a bunch of text boxes in here, right? And these text boxes, let's say each one of them has an entry, and let's say the validation exception that's happening didn't really happen on your local API client or your local portal, but it happened on an API. So you're basically going and calling all of these guys here. Let me put that guy right here. And the exception really happened all the way down here on the API, so it happened right here. But this exception is coming back with some problem details. What I want you to see here is your ability to be able to go and say, if this exception is targeting particular fields, let's build our components, our base text, and our base labels to be able to go and say, pick up the issue in the text and mark the field, unless the field is not available, right? This is going to be the next step to this. So I hope you found this a little bit useful. This is a little bit of an advanced topic. There's a lot of underlying foundation work that I had to put in there. If you're following the series and the build and the standard and all of these engineering practices that we're trying to advocate, for almost, I think almost 7 years now, if you're following any of that stuff, you will start seeing, how important this piece is to that journey towards communicating a problem detail all the way up to the UI. As usual, I hope you found this useful. I hope you can use this and make your life easier when it comes to your engineering experience. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, please feel free to drop a comment in the comment section. I'm very pleased and very happy to see your feedback and your kind words. The people that leave in kind words, I really appreciate that. It really is spirit lifting. And I'm more than happy to answer the questions as long as I know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you I don't know the answer. And don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you found this useful, and I'll see you in another video. Take care. Bye.